as we look at Jesus and his message of the kingdom, and it obviously brings conflict with the leaders of the present kingdom to a head, and as he enters Jerusalem in his last year of his ministry, it's signaling kind of the last week of his life, and that will end in Passover with his crucifixion. As we look at that, we've been talking about this idea of the message of the kingdom and of internal submission, and this dichotomy between kind of the physical and the spiritual. When we look at what does the kingdom have to offer, why would we choose the spiritual over the physical? I can imagine people who have a lot in this world saying, hey, I've got cars and I've got houses, I've got, positions, I've got power, whatever, I can hand out influence. What do I need any of this spiritual stuff for?
You could, go down the route and say that one is temporal and one's eternal. Mm-hmm. And therefore the eternal should have the greater value. But even still, how many examples do we need in this life of people who have, all the accoutrements of wealth and are miserable? And I think if they could take a step back from earth and be able to see what it really costs them to maybe have some of these things, or maybe to see that these things have had them, maybe they would have chose the spiritual. I don't know.
Yeah. It seems like people don't analyze their own assumptions. And is there a set of assumptions that we're missing out on or failing to analyze or look at when we kind of pursue physical things?
I think the assumption is that they kind of, money is the answer to all things, right? Mm-hmm. Is a phrase you'll hear, and that's kind of the assumption. You think that money cures all that's wrong, and
right.
That is so not true.
Yeah, and the thing that's funny about that is when we really ask ourselves, well, what is money? It's a piece of paper. It's a little different than another piece of paper. If I go outside and look on my windshield and there's a coupon underneath the windshield wiper, I get upset and throw it away. But if somebody put $100 bill, but the bottom line is they're both pieces of paper, and it seems strange that we think that one of them will solve our problems and is a reason to live, and the other one is just an impediment to our lives.
Well, I mean, it does have transactional value,
sure,
obviously,
sure.
and
Sure, but at the bottom line is that it's a physical thing. It seems like we're not asking ourselves the question is, why do we want this physical thing? And it's generally at the end of a string of questions about why is very rarely a physical thing. Would you agree with that?
I don't know. Maybe. I'm reminded of the Vietnam POW and that you talked about once upon a time, who basically stored up tremendous amounts of food later on in life, and he says, "I'm never going to be hungry again."
Right.
And so I guess would his storing up of the wealth of food have a physical root in that case, and sort of. In his lack and stuff like that. But I think somehow, especially in this country, we are born from the womb wanting this ability, this purchasing power to great degrees. I see it in my boys already, and in their case, I don't think it's necessarily rooted in a physical thing.
Right. It seems to me like, when we ask ourselves why, I need a big house. Why? So that I can, attract a pretty wife. Why? Or, so you go back, I need to go to good college. Why? So I can get a good job. Why? So I can have money. Why? So I can get a big house. And at the end of it, it seems to be so that I'll be happy, right? So that I'll have joy. So those things are not really the end goal. Joy is the end goal. And why do those things so often not lead to that?
That is a great question. And I think at the end of the day, they've never had the power to lead to that. And it is the spiritual things that lead to that. And don't get me wrong, having money and wealth can definitely make certain things easier and maybe help you avoid some stress here and there. But they've never had the power to give you the spiritual things.
Right. It seems like we never really examine the idea that something has value because we value it, and ultimately that's a spiritual thing. I mean, we've all probably, I'm sure you've seen people who have things that you considered of great value that they didn't value at all. And it's possible to. I mean, I remember a mutual friend of ours talking about her boss who bought a brand new snowmobile and didn't like it, so they set it on fire, or
Yeah, same day.
same day, yeah, and so really, is the idea of valuing a completely spiritual act?
I guess in a sense it is, and it dawns on me that those who have much wealth in this life, maybe it becomes very difficult for them to put value on things, especially to put proper values
Right.
on things, and maybe it actually is in some case, in many cases, maybe antagonistic
Right.
to having the spiritual.
Right, right. And that's not to say, when we say it's a spiritual thing, that it's all relative. I mean, obviously you can value whatever you want to, but it's not as if no matter what you value, the same outcome occurs, right? And so I guess that's the point of the proper hierarchy in the kingdom of God, and submitting to that is submitting to a set of values that has a good outcome. And so it seems to me that it's so difficult for us, even once we kind of mentally accept this, to live this out. And why is that? You know what I'm saying? Like, you could sit down and have a conversation with somebody and say, we could go through the steps of, does money really have value, or what are you really after? And they could agree with us. But then it's likely that they would go back and, Monday morning, they would repeat the same thing that they were doing before.
Yeah, I think you can look at it at two levels, and I think Jesus kind of addresses both. And you can look at it from kind of wealth and opulence, and maybe with the religious elite, and in some cases is where Jesus goes with that. But you can totally go the other end of the spectrum for the poor as well, and it comes down to worry and stress, and
Right.
and Jesus goes there as well, and talks about the lilies of the field, and look how they're clothed, and
Right,
aren't
right.
you worth more than they? And so maybe it comes down to a little bit of trust as well.
Right.
Do I have a loving Father in heaven who's looking after me? Or do I need to
Right.
accumulate as much as I can because he's not there?
Right. It's kind of like, when you're in line to ride a roller coaster, and mentally this is a safe ride. You could, because obviously most of the time the lines are long, and so you get a chance to watch it go over and over and over again. And yet, when you sit down and strap in, there's that thing in the back of your mind that says, this doesn't seem like a good idea. And so it does seem like that faith really is key to this. And so what is Jesus doing as far as his ministry is concerned to give people faith?
I mean, he does a variety of things, going out there among the people, but in some cases he meets their physical needs, in feeding the 5,000 and the 4,000. He's healing the sick and stuff like this, but it's more than that though too, because a lot of people do get to experience those things and just walk away.
Yeah. It seems like the ultimate thing is obviously ahead of him still, and that's rising from the dead.